everybody, I am so excited because, wow, Kevin, I haven't seen you since you were in 8th grade. Was it 7th grade?
Right.
A period of my life, I wanted to be a history teacher. And Kevin and his gaggle of friends at the time were all part of the class that I was helping out, sort of guide and sort of mentor. That was before I discovered music and really just committed to pursuing a career in music. But Kevin, how you doing, man? It's been a minute.
Great. Yeah, growing
You're a
up a little
music
bit
teacher.
since 8th grade.
Yeah, you're in your 30s now, aren't
Yep.
you? I hope
Yep.
so. And
And
you're a
wiser.
music teacher.
Yes, I am.
And you're also obsessed with video games.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of about video game music, would you say? And how does it influence and sort of impact, I guess, your music, the way that you teach? Does it impact it?
Absolutely. Video game music is probably one of the biggest avenues of music that got me into wanting to pursue music on my own and to learn how to play instruments. It started it all, really. It's video game music. Playing RPGs as a kid and just reading those texts because there was no voice acting at the time, and then having the music accompany the text, and it really just enhanced the story, just like all music.
Yeah, it's a really impressive thing, isn't it? How music, both in and out of context, can guide and move the emotional journey. I didn't fully understand it at the time, but video game music was the reason I even started a career in music, you know what I mean? So it's crazy that you also followed that thread. And did you always want to be a music educator? When did you find out that you wanted to be a music person?
Music education kind of came later. I was originally a performance major on guitar, and I took a education class, and I was going to all these schools and seeing it happen. I was like, wow, this is awesome. I'd love to be a part of this and impact
And that
the world in that way. Yeah.
So did you learn classical guitar or
It was more of a general pick style guitar, and then eventually that led on to I had to go back to my saxophone roots from high school, and I had to relearn saxophone a little bit. And so I'm kind of a rocky road getting through college with me with terms of instrument specialization. I didn't just pick one and start to finish.
Because they do force you to sort of specialize, don't they?
Right. And I didn't know that until I was already in it. It's okay, I got to change roles here a little bit, which is
What did
fun.
you specialize in college?
I started on guitar, but with guitar in college, you have to take that vocal general music track, and I wanted to be a band teacher. So
So then you switched to saxophone.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited because you and I have probably been playing games for largely the same amount of time, just in different years. I was curious, what did you bring first to start?
I brought a lot of modern stuff. I was going to go back to my past and some really old. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go with what I've been recently inspired by. This one's pretty relevant because it recently has an HBO series.
All right, so the first one you brought is The Last of Us Part 2 main theme. Is this
Yep.
different from the Part 1 main theme? I can't remember.
I'm not sure.
That's way different than the first one. Oh my god, it's kind of rough, isn't it? Well, you tell me. Like, so why is this one of your favorite themes, and why do you listen to this?
Just as a musician and musical taste, I love pedal tones. And people who are listening, pedal tones are when there's one stable tone that stays the same, and then there's other chords that happen on top of that, and it just works so well here. I love the minimalism of it, and it just spells out The Last of Us so perfectly in 2 minutes and 54 seconds.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to listen to that and feel like a sense of relief or a sense
right.
of calm. You're right. You know, the pedal tone is actually really interesting, but there's also what I really find interesting too is the space that we hear in between the notes. We're just moving our fingers and plucking. There's almost like this large gap in between each of the notes as they're being plucked, which I find really interesting, because then at the very end we get this slight rallentando, which rallentando in Italian means to sort of slow down, and there's a little rubato, which is to really slow down before we pick back up, that we hear at the very, very end as sort of like this like sort of release and come down. It's really interesting. Now, you and I both know what The Last of Us 1 sounds like, but what do you think, like, someone coming into this series, if they've never played The Last of Us, what do you think that this main theme would sort of like tell them?
It's a lonely experience. It gives me feelings of like desolation. It might just because I'm biased, but I feel like you can really hear that post-apocalyptic world. Like we said, that space, and it's like the single line plucking. I think it might be a banjo.
Yeah, I think it's a banjo. The single line is really interesting, and I also think it's really cool that the pedal tone and the drone, I would call it a drone, but pedal tone is the official name. But like, it almost has a dirge quality to it, where it feels really like almost like a funeral march kind of, even though there's not a lot of movement in there. I think Santa Olalla using the banjo and that pedal tone, but also it's interesting because the pedal tone doesn't come in all the time. Is that something you gravitate towards, like when you're own playing, or what kind of music do you enjoy playing on guitar?
This music in general is a huge influence for me in my writing, my guitar playing. I love that sense of, it almost sounds like it could be major. I guess it's like,
almost, right?
yeah, but then it always brings you back to like the minor sense and that idea of like that constant open string sound. And I come from mostly a metal background. That's most of my life I've spent that, and it's pretty metal. Like that playing there, the way, if you added some distortion to that, it would be pretty heavy for sure.
It's amazing how we can have like things that have tons of layering and tons of dynamic, like, you know, sort of like a big giant sandwich, and then we can also have these things that are like kind of like a small sandwich that still like has such a meaty bite to it. You know what I mean? It's interesting how both are valid and both work in causing us like emotion. How important do you think emotion is in terms of when it comes to like music? Like when you're talking about music education, when you're in your music education classes and you're teaching music, like how often are you referencing emotion, or is it more about technique and like chord structure?
I have to check myself, because I think that's very important, but sometimes as an educator you forget about that stuff, and you just get so stuck in the theory and the learning, that the notes. But if you don't know what the notes are meaning, similar to language, you're not really saying much. So I always remind myself, like, emotion is what drives most music. Not always. I mean, sometimes it's just functional, but most of the time, the music that we connect with is emotion based. So
it's funny because growing up and going to music school and stuff, we really weren't. I had theory classes, right? But like that was never where my passion lie. My passion was always in the means of expression and like telling a story through voice and whether it was like musical theater or opera, and one of the things that I wish that I sort of had a better grasp on is like, well, this chord, you know, recognizing chord structures like by listening to them. And I'm always so impressed by composers or musicians. Usually it's non-singer musicians or usually instrumentalists that have a better grasp of like chord structure and stuff, just because because like, I feel like, do you feel like as a guitarist, because you need to see in like, you need to understand what a G major seventh is or a G minor seventh on the guitar, right? Because your fingering is what's guiding you. So do you feel like as an instrumentalist, you think you're more able to grasp like chords if you hear them or see
definitely
them?
But when you were mentioning that the chord structure, the goal is to have that stuff so memorized where you can just focus on what are you trying to express when you play that chord.
Right.
Which is, as a vocalist, that's your main focus most of the time. And once you have the openness here and that's set, it's
a funny thing how different 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 instrumental tracks focus on different things. And like I had a sax professor on, and I know that you were talking about saxophone earlier, and like the way that he was describing how the saxophone can growl or laugh or do whatever, but then also in terms of the way that the saxophone tells its story, just like vocalists tell their story, is so interesting, because each instrument offers its own insight into like ideas of emotion. That's the one corner I wish I understood more, was like chords, because sometimes I'll like watch some of my composer contemporaries here on YouTube, and they're like, oh, that's a G major. I don't know why I'm stuck on G today, but like that's G major, and I'm over here like, yeah, but that makes me feel XYZ. And it's not to say that one is invalid and the other one is, you know, they're both two peas of the same pod. Anyway, long story short, the question was just like, you know, it's cool that you have to actually like let people know like emotion is as important as a 4-5-1 resolution.
Right.
What is your typical like day when it comes to being a music educator? It's for high school, isn't it?
Elementary mostly. Every place is different. My district, there's one day where you have all the band classes, which is the big groups that come in all the instruments at once, and that's, I call it, it's kind of like a marathon. You have one band, they leave, another one comes in, and they shuffle through all day 6 times in a row. I pretty much have to stick to my plan that I have and deviate from that and make sure it stays on track, because there's just so many bodies at once. And the age group, you know, if you're not keeping them on a goal, then it's hard to get into like, oh, let's talk about the philosophy of Last of Us 2 and how the music connects. You know, like it's just not. So a lot of it has to be quick little snippets here and there. And then the other day is more of a specialized day where set instruments come in, and that's where you have a little more time, a little more space to have those more in-depth discussions.
You're not necessarily lecturing, it's more of a tactile approach.
Yes, especially with my teaching philosophy, it's very little lecturing, and it's all about doing what are we going to do to learn the thing instead of talk about it. Yeah,
man, that's so funny, because I mean, when I was in 5th grade, I was playing clarinet and I was really bad. So even just like having a teacher that to be like, don't go so far down on the reed so that you're squeaking, and like all these little things that sort of that's when the bug really starts to kick in for so many of us, is those pivotal years. So you actually have a huge job, which a lot of people probably don't realize.
Yeah, and it happens so fast, and the decisions are. Lots of decisions every minute.
Well, so for me, I'm going to go backwards, because I haven't really talked about this a lot, but the Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty OST, the main theme was one that I used to listen to on repeat. I used to work out to this like in my parents' basement. I was obsessed with Metal Gear Solid 2 for a really long time. Have you ever played it?
That's the one with Raiden, right?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. That was my favorite one.
man, that just hits. It hits as well as it did when I first heard it.
Yeah.
Gosh, I haven't listened to that in so long. What do you think of that? Because there's like 4 distinct sections in there. It's like its own,
right?
It's like 4 different pieces.
I'm happy you brought that in. I wasn't sure it was going to be that one until that melody hit. I almost brought this one in too because I love that melody so much. It's so simple, so effective, and it just keeps coming in different ways the whole time with different sections underneath, and it's just such a great track, and it really encapsulates that story.
Yeah, I think it really does too. And I think one of the things that makes it really cool is that we essentially get 4 distinct versions of it. And I wonder what the thematic, like, if there was some thematic undertones for that, because obviously the last half feels super patriotic because we have the sort of big brass with strings. And,
and it has that like a march style.
Definitely. I also like how we kind of start with that, like, almost like technology soundscape, because so much of this game like leans on this excessive use of almost like comical use of like technology and advanced weaponry and stuff. It's just such a journey, and it's just so fun to listen to. It's I don't know, I don't think it's that deep. Like there's obviously stuff that we could sit down and dissect, but at the same time it's just like really freaking pleasant.
What's awesome about stuff like that is you could pick up an instrument as a beginner and learn that melody, and now you're playing an authentic piece of music. Instead of taking a lot of classical music, you kind of have to water it down and do like the elementary version. That you could literally play that melody as written, and then you could add that bass line in, and there you are. You're playing a real piece of music that exists in our world. So,
do you think that then, because we do have to sort of have these different versions, like the beginner, the mediate, the the moderate, and the advanced version, or then the original version of pieces, that like. Is that like a negative to the fact that video game music can be sometimes a bit too simple, or is it's just good as it is?
Yeah,
you know
I think that comes down to, for me, that seems like more of a personal prep. For me, I think that music is highly effective just as much as like a really in-depth like harmonic piece. Like that really moved me, especially because it is accompanied by a whole story along with it. Then again, I think a lot of these video game composers they have to make a bunch of music really fast for a game. It's not like a classical composer will just go and write their opus. It's not. I don't think they're trying to do that. It's a different style. They're trying to enhance the media that it's going along with. So
well, and then that dives into like the validity and the importance of context, and how much context does really, really, really drive so much of what we experience, and how this music really, it's great on its own, but with the gameplay it does get notched up to like 100. If this is like a 75, there's a big difference between 75 and 100% in terms of how it feels.
And I've seen on your page, you've had people come in who don't really play games, and you have them listen to tracks. I'd be curious, like, what would they think about that, because we've both played that game, and that brings me back to Xbox era when I played it, and like so there's nostalgia piece as well.
I know, and I wonder that, because sometimes I'll bring a piece and someone's like, well, that's a little derivative, and I'm like, derivative? how come? And I enjoy it so much that, well, regardless of context, I enjoy it so much. But then it's like, well, what about this is derivative? If anything, is it derivative, or is it just a question of just like personal taste, right? And like, am I just too close to it? So like, I like almost like enjoy it too much because I love it and love the medium that it exists within. What you got for me? What's next?
I'm gonna stay in the modern era. I'm gonna finish with one of my favorites. This is from Alan Wake 2, which needs more love out there in the mainstream media.
Oh, I love that you didn't bring Herald of Darkness.
Yeah.
It's so over.
Yeah.
This is No One Left to Love. Where does this take place in the...
Every chapter ends with a song. And I think what's cool about this game is, I believe Remedy had a bunch of musicians come in, and they like formed these bands for this game, and they recorded tracks as those bands throughout. So this is one of them. And it's kind of like a pop style track, but it's really, really well done.
dark, I'm pushing through. Through the end, I'm reaching you. Though they keep saying that my baby is gone, I keep on loving you. For my love's the light, holding you tight, holding you tight. And they can never take that away. I'll change the story where it's saying there is no one left to love. And there's no light left to guide us home. I keep you with me through the darkest nights. And I won't let go, won't let go. I lost that blood along the way. Still got my voice, last words to say. I'll change this story so it's saying when there's no one left to love. And there's no light left to guide us home. Still keep you with me through the darkest night. And I won't let go, won't let go. Yeah, there's always you to love. There's a spark of light to guide us home. I keep you with me through the darkest nights. And I won't let go, won't let go. No, I won't let go.
Wow. So what about that piece? I mean, I have my guesses, but like, why is it one of your favorites?
If you've played any Alan Wake, you know it's a very dramatic game. The overarching story is this writer writes himself into his own story, and the whole thing is this tear between reality and the story he's written. And so a lot of crazy stuff happens in these games. These chapters end, obviously, with big finales. And when this chapter ended, it was a huge moment. Everything goes silent, and then that big synth hits with that like guitar. It's like it just caught my attention right away and really gripped me in. I love the contrast of that downtrodden low-key verse with the big hitting chorus, and it's just a great track. It's a great tune. I could hear that on like just a radio station that's on its own, not even associated with.
1,000,000%. I mean, there were so many interesting things in there. For one, like there were 3 distinct layers when it started, because you have like you're right, because it hits out of nowhere, and then you have like the drums, I think there were 2 guitars, and it was almost oppressive, and then you get that wail of the siren call, almost like as if like, I don't know, like there's an ambulance coming, which I thought was really interesting. The intro was really, really violent. Then what was interesting, and you pointed this out, is that the vocal quality itself, first of all, I wasn't expecting it to be a voiced song because there's no indication that a melody is going to come in at all, right? But then the vocal quality, it sounds like an insult, but it was hoarse, which is so effective because it's all like super breathy and super like on the chords, which really gives it a sense of like handing emotion to you on a silver platter. You know what I mean? Like there's a sense of complete like almost like collapsing or desperation because wanting things to be different than they actually are. I thought that the whisper chorus, that was really interesting because I felt like that connected us to like a shadow element that we get in Alan Wake. What I was really surprised by was how strong the vocals are, and when the chorus comes in, the chorus proper, and then the melodic, the actual writing of the notes for the melody, da 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 ba da da da. It's this mix of a plea mixed in with like hope, mixed in with a sense of like deep regret and loss, which is really,
Right.
really effective. And I think overall, like the main takeaway I felt was that it was a really visceral song, which is interesting because like vocally it's quite pretty, but it really feels
Right.
like a gut punch. And then the short abrupt ending is so like
Yeah,
over,
right.
you know,
And then
like,
another,
out.
but then with the gameplay, another chapter kind of fades in. It's like, okay, we're getting back into this. Like
we're keeping
now
it
what?
going.
Yeah. But it gives that and then feeling, which is awesome. I love how you said violent and visceral, because the reason I was drawn to it is that really awesome. It happens only a few times. The da 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 dum in the very beginning. That was just such a beautiful little line, and it's gritty
Hard,
saw and like yeah.
Well, and also too, like it has, you know, I think it opens a discussion too, which is interesting about what does a descending line even mean? Like, why does a descending line make us feel differently than an ascending line? What are the similarities and differences between any ascending and descending
Right.
line? Is there a difference? I mean, what do you think? Go
Descending, that's the name Alan. That's Alan Wake. It's just you just descend into everything, like into madness, chaos. Like it's just, and that's what happened. It's absolutely it pulls you down, and then after that nice melody, it has that like siren thing. That's the more of it's like an effect, a glissando, and then it just keeps bringing you deeper.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool too, isn't it? Because like a descending line, it depending on the notes played, it can have 3 to 5 different meanings. It can be desperation, it can be bleakness, it can be that to me, that da 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 da, that to me sounds like hope in a really bad situation. It's so interesting how notes can cause such a wide array. I think sometimes what is hard is that when we're not dealing with like facts, we're dealing with emotion. Like, yes, fact is it's written this way, right? Like that's the fact. The structure of the song is correct. But what's always up for interpretation, and some might call it surface level, but it's really not, because the emotional component and the emotional element of what we're dealing with is actually really complicated, because it's not just I feel this way. It's like it does this because of the way that a chord descends, and then you have to think about what's underneath and how all these layers produce an emotional quality, including a sound quality. And I find
Right.
that's a really interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't necessarily enjoy.
Yeah, and that's the conversation reminded me. Like that's what understanding music is about. Like you have to understand that everything that just happened in that piece is intentional. They were making decisions with all like that descending line verse. There's a reason they did those specific notes descending into. I mean, sometimes there's theoretical reasons, like we have to get to that chord, so we have to make that note that. But overall, it's mostly just thinking of how can we arc people's emotions to certain things.
In opera school, they would be like, well, the composer did this because, or they annotated it this way because they wanted it to be exactly as it was written, right? And there's 2 schools of thought. There's come scritto, you know, the as written version of this, or there's their interpretive, like, well, I'm going to do a rallentando here because this is how I feel emotionally at this moment, or I'm going to have a slowdown and then a speed up called the rubato here because I want this to be accented. The reality is that because so many composers are dead, that we like sort of glom onto in standard musical practice, a lot of times they may have just written things because that's just what worked, and there was no deeper thought to it. But how cool is it that we can sit here and be pedantic about whether or not something is like, you know, whatever it is, because that's the beauty of like sitting in a rehearsal space and like working on a piece of music, because who knows why they did what they did, but chances are they did it for XYZ reasons. So let's really lean into that emotionally too, you know?
And I assume some composers would be more collaborative than others if they're around today. Like if you're working with them, like someone would be like, yeah, go for it, that's awesome. Or someone would be like, no,
for
do it
sure.
this way.
Yeah, they'd be like, that sounds great. Let's do Proof of a Hero, the OG. So this is the original Proof of a Hero from Monster Hunter. Had you heard that before?
I got into Monster Hunter with World, so I've heard versions of that, but I've never heard the OG, which was awesome to hear. Now I see where they got all their ideas from. I think that's probably the strongest version of that theme I've heard.
There's one from Double X that's phenomenal, and it's a little bit more nuanced, but that one just hits it home for me, like the sense of grandeur and the sense of adventure, the sense of looking out into the distance and seeing a beautiful vista with a bunch of monsters running around. Because I was like you, I didn't really get into Monster Hunter until World, and then once I got into World, I really sunk in about 115 hours, and I was just like super locked into it. There's such a sense of like elegance in Monster Hunter in general that I think really comes across, especially with the strings. And obviously then the horns are really like about, you know, doing battle and but I don't know, it's not violent right. though, which is sort of funny.
It's performed in a very fun way. The way they're playing is bouncy and like it's a lighter articulation, and it's like a playful version of a battle cry. And Capcom is like that, because Capcom games are very gamey. Like it's all about getting gear and leveling up.
God, the middle section. Da, 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 ya, da, da. And I think that really represents this feeling of the peace after a long day, like resting in the shade. I don't know. It's amazing how we can get these little visuals from music.
For me, that kind of reminded me of this thing with Monster Hunter is you are just out just killing these monsters, you know, and it's kind of sad, you know, like they're probably just trying to live their lives, and here you come like with your the biggest sword ever created, made out of monsters that you killed, to just like strike this poor bird bird thing down. Like that peaceful part is like, yeah, it's sad, but you know, we got to do it. It's all in a day's work.
I haven't talked about this piece ever, actually, but this is from The Witcher 3, The Fields of Ard Skellig. The Skellig Isles were just incredible when I played this game, and I played this game for many hundreds of hours, and I love this game. Had you heard that before?
I wish I could get into Witcher 3. I've tried so hard. It has everything I would like about the world. It has the cool sword guy, the evil kings, the big landscapes, and the sorcerer. But like for some reason, I've tried many times. I've even tried to read the books and watch a show to get into it. And it's like for some reason it just doesn't click with me. But that is an amazing piece of music.
There are so many little things in there. I think just the way it starts, obviously, with, I think it's a cello, and just the way that it really feels like you're sort of looking at this vista. And the thing about the Skellig Isles is that there's just tons. It's sort of like Viking-ish, I guess, but they're huge mountain peaks and snowy mountaintops and such lush forests, and just exploring it. I think that was the highlight of my playthrough. That and Gwent, I would say, are the two things that really stuck out to me. But like Gwent being the card game that's in the game. It was such a peaceful, even though like there was obviously a lot of killing and stuff, like I think it's a beautiful piece on its own, but I think like also just feeling the weight of the landscape in there, especially with the vocalism there, really gentle sort of like lilting arpeggiation, not arpeggiation, sorry, appoggiaturas and sort of grace notes and all these other things that really make it feel very lived in, old, ancient, but also like gentle and serene. Feels like the wind blowing.
And the language was it Scottish?
The language is Scots Gaelic, and the song is called Fear Abata.
Okay.
Which is fear a boatman.
I kind of just did an estimated guess on it because it just sounded like very Celtic. So
yeah, and I feel like I wonder too, like if that's not like a typical like forest sort of style. You know what I mean? Like Marcin Przebywowicz, obviously like I would feel is certainly inspired by that. And there's also like Slavic influences in it. If you've never listened to the soundtrack, I would suggest just sitting down and listening to the soundtrack itself. Like there's some real like great pieces for a wide variety of different moods that might be fun for you to listen to for sure though.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna have to check up more. Maybe I'll try and play one more time.
What's your next piece?
I wanted to end divisive. So my favorite series of all time is Final Fantasy, by far. It's always spoken to me, and I'm like a huge fanboy, and even if they're not very good, I like them just because I think the world they created, it really hits everything I'm looking for. This is from Final Fantasy VIII. It's the opening theme.
Oh, Liberi Fatali?
Yep. And this one, like, it's kind of like after Final Fantasy VII, it was really hard to follow up with that, but this intro just hit so hard. I think the reason I never actually beat this one, even though I like it so much, it's so beloved to me. I spent so much time just resetting to watch this intro scene at the time, which it was so impressive to me. Just the graphics and the music was obviously a step up from Final Fantasy VII's completely MIDI stuff, so it was just cool to hear.
I mean, arguably, it's probably the best Final Fantasy
Yeah.
intro.
Right. If you put them all side by side, like that one sets up like, okay, I'm ready for this. Like it really gets you prepared.
It's so intense. There's so many like little musical things in there that just like send it home. Are there any particular musical? I assume this is a piece you've listened to quite a bit. Is there like a section or like a phrase or something that really stands out
It's
to
like
you?
towards the beginning before it gets a little intense. It's like the little piano, like all those little flutters in there.
I love the visually when the feather goes up
Yeah.
into the air, or the sword goes up into the air, it comes down as the feather. I think that's that
Right.
part actually. I love the piano. I love when dong, ba, 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 ba. Oh, it's so good.
It's just epic. Like it has like the way it just hits, and it starts off with that water, and it has like that breathiness to it with the singers, and I believe it's Latin as well. It's like a Latin thing. It's like, okay, they're doing this whole thing with the Latin singers, and then it really sets you up like it's a character-driven story. There's a lot of different emotions, and the piece is showing you all these different characters and representing them really well. Like when you see Renoa, the music goes to her, and then when you see
picks up
Adia
the
or
swells,
Adea, I don't know how to pronounce it. It has like this mysterious vibe, and then when Cypher and Squall they do the little rivalry, that's when the music picks up. It's just so well done.
Yeah, no, it's actually amazing. Have you ever heard the opening of Final Fantasy III, Eternal
No.
Wind? Hold on, before we, I have to. Now it's nothing like
No.
Final Fantasy VIII, but. So, okay, I know it's not Liberi Fatali, but what do you make of that? I mean,
That is so Final Fantasy. Everything about it. I don't know if it'll pick up on video, but when the music picked up a little bit with like the big Final Fantasy themes, and then the people came out on the chocobos and the airship flew up. I definitely smiled. I don't know if it showed, but I would feel like, wow, that's my happy place right there. This is where I feel like this is the third one. So it was 1, 2, like canonically actually. Okay, I feel like this definitely gives me the first sense of, okay, they're really going all in on their style now. They got the crystals, they got the characters, the chocobos, the airships. So in the music also, what they have that main theme is they're really committing now. This is going to be the theme. The 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5.
Well, I felt it was important to at least share that with you because as a huge fan of Final Fantasy, I feel like it's an important thing to share with people who haven't seen it or listen to Eternal Wind, because Eternal Winds is amazing. It's actually all over Final Fantasy 14. If you ever get the chance to play that, it's all over Shadowbringers.
Yeah, because all those expansions do different. They kind of get influenced by different mainline games, right? Yeah.
As a Final Fantasy fan, you owe it to yourself to play. It's up to level 70 with a free trial through Stormblood. So I mean,
sometime.
Kevin, I mean, obviously I know that you're a huge video game fan and a music teacher and stuff, but do you feel like, was there anything from today that sort of like stood out to you as something you learned or something that you had a different appreciation for or...
Yes. It reminded me, I have to do this more. Just like stop and just listen without trying to make it like an assignment for myself. Like, oh, I need to learn more. Like, just use the skills I know, what I know, and just listen to music and connect and find things and think, why is that like that? And I've heard many of these pieces a lot of times, but listening today feels different than when I was making the list. I was just kind of like, oh, I like that one, I'll put that one on. But like going back to that Last of Us piece and just really listening, like, wow, what a great series. It just reminds me of the appreciation I have for these artists and developers making these awesome stories.
Sometimes being a music teacher, I know we touched on this earlier, but do you feel like sometimes you're sort of in the weeds because you're trying to teach like tonal structure and pitch, how to properly do pitch and create a melody and have rhythm, and like what are some of the challenges what are some of the challenges that you encounter that would cause you to not be able to take a step back and really like think about them in a deeper way?
Yeah, a lot of it, because it's elementary level, the music can be very, very rudimentary at times, so it's hard to do that to that, like hot cross buns, like there's only so many ways you can listen to that tune. But maybe I could think about that, because I could work on that. Like there's other ways you could totally change that piece around and make it mean something totally different. So
yeah, it's kind of interesting, because it's like, well, with hot cross buns, if you don't know what that is, it's hot cross buns, see how they run. But I mean, maybe it's about more legato phrasing or more, sharper rhythm, or it's interesting how, kudos to you, because I quit music ed my last year. I had to do practicum, which was student teaching, and I said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah,
like I couldn't bring myself to finish, because it wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was to perform and express myself, and I find that expression is such a key tenet. And anyone who says otherwise, I mean, obviously theory and the building blocks of music are the most fundamental aspect of it, but anybody who says that expression is less important than those things, I don't agree. I mean, yes, we have to know like what the chords are and how they fit, how we fit into the picture, whether we're a solo instrument or in an ensemble. But I think people do get hung up on like the structure of things more than they do as a relevant idea, rather than like the means of untapping expression and connecting.
Right. And I've felt like that today. I was getting pulled in that direction, like, oh, I have to talk on the exact specifics of the structure of AB form to really make a point. But like, you don't. Like, you can just listen, and what does it remind you of? What do you hear?
Well, and for me, it's the opposite, actually. I feel like with you being on today, I feel like I was able to think about, okay, well, the importance of why things are played the way they're played, and the way that things exist in terms of tonal center and harmony and counter melody, and how these things are adequate. It was just from like limited conversation. I was like, oh yeah, impression's really good and expression's really important, but it's also important to like understand the the through line of
Right,
the piece.
and that's
why
kind
a
of
piece
like what a
exists
piece does.
structurally.
It takes that, it structures the expression to make it more of a deliverable rather than.
Right.
That's what makes music so powerful.
And that's
yeah.
like it like hands the it's like the tray for if expression is the food, then the composition is like the tray
Right.
which you carry in order to deliver the food to the person or the audience in that case. Well, I really appreciate you
course.
coming on, man. It's really good to see you. Gosh, it's been ages, 10 to
Yeah,
20 years at
right.
this point. But thanks everybody, of course, for watching this. Do you have like socials and stuff you want me to post or share, or you
Sure, yeah.
keep
I mean, I don't really
private?
have a content creator background. There's not much, just me. I play guitar and stuff on Instagram.
Well, you're
Yeah.
welcome to check out
Yeah.
Kevin's stuff on Instagram.
Disrupting underscore class if you want to send a follow.
Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Talk to you later. Bye everybody.
everybody.
See ya.